What is up, everybody? Welcome to Take on the World TV. I am Chris, host of Sound Off Show. And tonight we have a special episode for you guys because we have not been here in a long time. We've been teasing to come back for a while. Nobody even probably watches us anymore because we haven't done a show probably in close to, man, it's got to be close to a year. I'd have to go find that out. So yeah, we have some great things. Hey, we got some people in the chat, so thank you guys for being here so far. And tonight, I have a really special. So hopefully you guys watched the beginning of this, and if this is all you watch, that is probably enough. So we're going to ask for some prayer. Our good dear friend Amber Plaster, she's been dealing with cancer, as many of you guys have probably already known. I have an update on just what just occurred. So I want you guys to be in prayer for some recovery here. So Amber's lung surgery, she had lung surgery tonight, and that did go well. She had some issues, complications. They're going to find out why that occurred. So it went well, and she's in recovery. So pray for her pain management and that she can go home on Thursday, as she's been in the hospital now for 2 weeks. Her hysterectomy and exploratory surgery is on June 13th, so be in prayer for that. Pray for wisdom of all the doctors and for recovery for Amber and just all of her family members and all of us friends who have to notice all of that and just deal with this tough time. She's going to have to still go through some more chemotherapy throughout the summer, so pray for complete healing and prayers this summer. So she is a summer girl, so she's going to just totally miss that. So it's good to see everybody in the chat. Karen, it's good to see you. It's good to see you, Jesus Freak. We'll get you on another show down the road on Flat Out Insights, so which we do plan on coming back to that as well. So guys, normally Sound Off is Robbie and Johnny and Elijah. So pray for Elijah. He's also in a state of hiatus. He's got some life issues, some things of that. He had a new baby, but he has some other things that he's working through. So he is actually on indefinite hiatus. We don't know if he will ever make it back. So we do applaud Elijah for all the time that he was with us on Sound Off, and maybe one day he'll return. But we don't know what the future holds in that. And Johnny happens to be at a conference tonight, so Robbie is also going to take a break for tonight, and we're going to return back soon. But tonight, I have a very special guest who is the other member of Sound Off, and we're going to be interviewing just him tonight, from his story, from the beginning of his faith to his time in the music career, to all the things that have happened with him, to actually some of the things that he's actually facing today that he'll need some prayers for. So it's the one and only Doug Kirchner. How are you doing tonight, Doug?
Hey, everybody.
Awesome. So, hey, this is going to probably be probably PG-13, I would assume, right?
Well, it could be. I'll try to tame it a little bit, but
it is.
Unfortunately, you've known me for a long time, so I don't know what you'll ask and what you'll bring up, but I'm kind of scared.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know Doug, other than through Sound Off, and maybe that he was in the music industry, or maybe you've seen some of his episodes that he lost his child. We'll talk a little bit about that tonight as well. You might know him from that, but wow, he has had a huge, long music career, being involved in the Christian music industry. So we're going to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly. We're going to talk about his origins of faith, how he came to be the person that he is today, and even some of the things that led him down a path of darkness throughout the whole entire journey to, finally be the man that's, faced in front of us today, a man of faith, still strong after close to 50 years, right, Doug? I mean, you've been I mean, I don't want to say that. You're not 50 yet, so we can't say 50. So,
I'm only 48, Chris.
okay, so
So
it puts you close to 40 years of faith.
yes.
Close to 40, not quite because you got saved a little later, but that's a perfect place to start. Doug, let's go ahead and start. Were you raised in a Christian home? Were you a believer growing up? How did, and then what did it even look like?
So my home life from probably age 0 to, I want to say it was 8 years old when I got saved, or when my family got saved. I was born premature. I shouldn't have lived. There's a lot of history involved with that, but my house was anything but Christian. When I was younger, before we became Christians, my family has a history of dealing and being in what some would consider the mob, the Italian mob. One of my great uncles was my bad. One of my great uncles was the head of the 5 families of the New York mob. His name was Joe the Boss Masseria, and his right hand man was Lucky Luciano, which actually had him killed. I don't know too much about that history except for pretty much that. My grandma kept it kind of close to her sleeve. She didn't really want that to be our family legacy.
So was it connected to like a New York gang mob, or was it?
Well, the stuff that my dad and some of our other family members were tied to. I'm not so 100%. It was tied to New York, but it was also most of the East Coast. So when I was younger, we had one of my uncles. He was a drug dealer, and he dealt pretty much cocaine. It was the 80s, the Miami Vice stories were kind of true, and Pablo Escobar and all that kind of crazy stuff. But my uncle had a house in Miami, I believe it was Miami or between Miami and Tampa area, and he used to race horses, and that's how they used to get the drugs up here.
So you grew up, and did you know this was happening? Was it like very open in the family that whether everybody was involved in a life of crime? What was it like?
I mean, it was normal. It was normal to us, so we didn't know. I mean, my sister Julie and I talk about it to this day, that how did our parents allow this stuff to happen? Because, I mean, at any given time, we had people named Yo-Yo and gosh, I forget some of their names, but we had Colombians cutting cocaine in my bedroom. We had, kilos and kilos of cocaine on our dining room table.
Now, was your family members using as well?
I believe so. I mean, I know that my dad was, and I know that my uncle Sal had to have been. Even though they use what they sold.
I got a picture here.
Oh my gosh,
that's probably right around that time period, isn't it?
My sister's gonna kill you, Chris.
She doesn't watch Sound Off, so it's okay.
Watch, this will be the one episode she watches.
Right.
Yeah, I was probably about 8 years old.
And that's you in the camouflage. So let's make it very clear. I know you always looked older, but that's you in the camouflage.
Correct. And that's my cousin Marlo, actually my Uncle Sal's daughter, in the picture.
Okay.
With my sister Julie.
And we got another one. You didn't even change. You're still in the same camo. That's probably a little younger, right?
Probably.
Yeah, that's a picture with you and your mom.
Yep.
Yeah, so this is right that same era that we're talking about.
Yeah. Look at how dark I am. I
That's what
mean,
summertime will do to an Italian, right?
I forget a Sicilian, not an
A
Italian.
Cis- oh, you can't say Italian around a Sicilian, right?
Nope.
Uh, so 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 you're I'm sure there was a lot of sex involved around some of the other people, and you're probably exposed to a lot of stuff as a kid that you should have never been, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I know that as far as sex and drugs and the whole, I guess, rock and roll lifestyle that brought, um, we were kind of shielded from it. But there was, whenever there was major deals, um, somehow my sister got. Actually, my sister pretty much lived with my grandparents for most of that period of time because she was older. She didn't want to be around it. Um, and I was the one stuck at the house. However, all I remember was that there was always guns around. Um, I couldn't have anybody over. I couldn't hang out with friends from school. Um, and it was, we only hung out with family.
And you were in Cleveland at this time, correct?
Yeah. We used to live East 185th and Neff Road.
Yeah, so pretty bad neighborhood. So okay, so here you are, growing up in a home completely godless. Were your I mean, I would say the mob, there was like always probably a Catholic affiliation,
On my
being
mom's side,
okay.
my,
So
my dad was I think my dad was an atheist. If
but
I,
it was, but even with the Catholicism, even with that, the lifestyle was still very much um anti-God in every single way possible. That you grew up hearing every curse word in the book, seeing everything that you probably shouldn't have seen, cocaine being dealt, cut in your bedroom. So here you are. How did God even come into whose life did he first come into that changed this whole situation around?
well, honestly, my sister and I both went to Catholic school, and even when all this stuff was going on, my mom would tell you that I would write Bible books from stuff that I learned in school. Like I write little stories about Paul or John, and you know, kind of I kind of always shied away from that stuff. But um, my dad had cheated on my mom for most of their marriage up to that point, and they were getting divorced. Actually, they were separated, and they were going to get divorced. And my dad ended up staying at his parents' house, my grandpa and grandma Kirchner, because they used to spend like summers and lots of time in Virginia, where my grandma's from. And my sister and I were with my dad one night. We were getting ready to go to Cedar Point the next day, and my dad, I remember clear as day. He was up in the middle of the night talking to somebody, looking out the window, and I guess he was praying. And I mean, I never knew my dad to pray, so he ended up praying, and I heard him talking to God, and I audibly heard God talk back to him. And I kind of, we've even talked about it as recent as like a couple years ago, and he's like, he swears that I wasn't at the house, but I was. And I remember specifically where I was sleeping. I was sleeping on the floor next to my grandparents' bed because my dad was sleeping in their bed. And I remember where the window was, what it looked like at night, and he couldn't believe that I remembered what I remembered, as far as the discussion he had with God.
Hmm. So was that Was he talking to somebody? Was he being witnessed to? What was
he was just talking out. I guess it would be praying.
was he
And
was he frustrated with life and how things were going? Because I'm sure he had to be completely at unrest living a lifestyle like that for so long.
well, he had what I remember from that whole thing was that he was just asking God to restore his marriage. And so basically the next day, you know, we were driving to Cedar Point, and actually he took a weird route. And funny enough, we passed Beulah Beach.
Hmm.
I don't know if it was Beulah Beach back then. I don't know.
Well, it's been but I think that's been there for forever.
But his axle on his van broke, and he called everybody to try to get a ride home, and we're stuck in Vermilion, and the only person that was available to come and pick us up was my mom. And so I don't remember much about anything that happened, except for I know that when she came to pick us up, my mom and dad dropped us off at my aunt's house. And I think they went to, my mom had a daycare in Euclid, Ohio, at the time. And it was in the basement of a Foursquare church. And, they weren't Christians, but I was surprised, even thinking about it now, that the church would allow a non-Christian to run a business out of the basement of the church. But they went, and I believe they went and spoke to the pastor of that church that day. And all the while, finding out that stuff, the lawyer that my mom had hired was a Christian. She didn't know he was a Christian, and he was praying for restoration for their marriage. And when she found that out, she couldn't believe that a divorce lawyer would be praying for the restoration of their marriage. So I believe I want to say my dad was the first to get saved. And then it was my mom, and then it kind of trickled to other family members.
So what was your first encounter with faith personally?
I mean, I could say that when I was 8 years old, but I honestly don't remember that. I would say my first real encounter with faith was when I decided to walk in Christianity.
So before we get to that part, so here you are, 8 years old, right? And now your family's making a drastic change, right? Here they were living a mob style life. Your dad was cheating on his spouse, your mom. Things are probably not going good, and so he's seeking out something.
Yes.
Which I think for most of us or most people, when they try to live their own lives away from God, and sometimes they don't know it's God that they need, they end up in these situations. And maybe it's not going to be as extreme as his case, where he's sort of that married into the mob type of mentality because he's just from that family members, right?
Right.
What was life in the home like from going from a strict mob home and drugs and alcohol and sex to what was it, a night and day switch quickly, or how'd that look?
I mean, from what I can remember, yeah, it was like all of a sudden we went from all of that garbage to them just starting to go to church, starting to, they did a vow renewal. They did all of this stuff. And it kind of was like overnight that the change happened. I'm sure that, my dad struggled, my mom struggled with, whatever their sins were. I'm sure that, uh, it's hard to get off of drugs. So I'm sure that that was something that took a minute. I don't think that that was an overnight thing, but I do know that when they decided to become Christians and start going to church and all that, that they pretty much all the craziness stopped. All of the what some in the world would call fun stuff stopped. We
Or
did
you were much happier, weren't you?
I don't know.
You don't know? Well, I could tell you this: you had pictures that showed you were definitely happier.
I was little there, dude.
Yeah, I know that's much early. So that proved that you were happy in both, but that meant your parents did absolutely love you the whole entire time. So that, for most kids, that's all they're looking for is do they love you? And I think your dad wanting to know who God was an extension of wanting to do the very best for you guys as well. So,
Oh yeah, I mean, I'll say that before my dad was a Christian, he dabbled in witchcraft and Satanism, like a lot of people did back then with the Dungeons and Dragons games. But his games were crazy. He had a couple guys that he told me about that actually, when their character died in the game, actually committed suicide. He was very much into the occult aspect of life. The woman he cheated on my mom with was a witch. So whether he was an atheist or a Satanist, I'm not sure where he leaned, but I know it wasn't with God. So it kind of was. There was still some remnants of the old dad because my dad was abusive. My dad didn't know how to control his temper, and so that still carried on into their life as Christians.
yeah. So let's fast forward a little bit and get our part over with. So now your parents are Christians, going to church. Now you are going to start going to a Christian school, and that's where we happen to meet.
All downhill. All downhill.
Once you met me, it all went downhill. So yeah, we probably met in about the fourth grade.
Was it fourth grade?
About the fourth grade, yeah, about the fourth grade. I started going to the school that we met at in fourth grade, third to fourth grade. So it was probably right around that time. You were a little older because you were held back a few times to start off with.
Say, Chris, I was like 15 in fourth grade.
No, you were just old. You were just by the time you got to eighth grade, you should have been a 10th grader. So you had a full mustache, but that was Doug. So that's our story, which is, we were friends. You had more of a crush on my sister than you wanted to be my friend, but that's totally true.
You always have to bring that up, and
okay.
And at birthday parties or wherever your sister's at, you're always like, "Hey, remember?"
Well, I remember specifically you came over and visited for Cedar Point. We went to Cedar Point, and the whole time you kind of sat outside my bedroom door waiting for my sister to come out of her door. So I kind of knew he's not really
I don't remember that.
Out with me. He's not here to hang out with me.
I don't remember.
Yeah. So maybe my sister will watch this or not. We've already talked about that plenty on these shows. But so were you walking with Christ during those years when you knew me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when would you say your first? What age did you say you first probably had a semblance of the acknowledgement of salvation and what sort of that meant to you?
I mean, I would say that I remember specifically that I used to be in a group called Royal Rangers, which was an Assembly of God's version of Boy Scouts.
Okay.
And I remember going to one of our what they called powwows, and there was had to have been 1,000 kids there, and I just remember worshiping and praying and being a part of that, and that's where I really felt like my life changed. Um, so it was probably about age 10,
Okay.
10 or 11.
So here we are. So we go from just 2 years later after family is, walking. Is your rest of the siblings, your sister, she follow along in that same way as well?
Oh yeah, Julie, she did. She's 6 years older than me, so she was already a teenager and following suit with teenager life. Basically, when my parents became Christians, so right away she jumped into the life of, listening to Christian music, being involved in youth group. I mean, she went to the same school that we did, and she graduated there in 86, I want to say.
Okay.
So, and my younger sister, she wasn't around until I was 10.
So I'm going to ask this two-part question. Okay. So what was your first experience with Christian music, whether it been CCM or something your parents played? What was like maybe your first experience? And then I want you to lead to your true experience with Christian music, of something that you heard that you could identify with, and that was something that drastically changed being cool as a Christian, sort of as a young person.
Okay, so my first experience was, besides my parents listening to now Christian music, which was like Keith Green, and I remember a couple of their big secular artists that they had when they were kids, B.J. Thomas and Dion DiMucci. Those I remember, but my first real hit of Christian music was going to see Michael W. Smith with Amy Grant, I think. And then that was just weak. I was going to say. Sorry to all my CCM friends out there. No. And then
what did that do for you? I mean, did you look at that and go, "This is great. They're worshiping God," but it didn't do something that
didn't register. Okay. It didn't register on that aspect until I got older.
Okay.
So, you fast forward a few years. I had kind of found a niche of music that I'd liked. So there was, my parents hated that I liked heavy metal music, and we were trying to think of where how my first inkling of that happened, but where everything takes a turn. I listen to a lot of music. I have a lot of music at home, and I get kicked out of the Christian school that we went to, and
that was because he was back talking to teacher.
I was not.
Yes, it wasn't drugs at this point. We'll get there.
I should have been taking drugs back then. PG-13, guys. PG-13.
Hey, it's almost 11 now, so we'll now the NC-17 rating is going to come out.
I wonder how many people have actually left this and said, "Oh my gosh, this is so boring." You know,
Hey,
so
look. I'll say this, Doug. Um, People's stories where God has their hands in, as dry as stories are, and your story isn't dry, right? So you have, there's going to be so many different layers and avenues to unpack here. But I would say I have a very boring story, but in that boring story still reveals God's glory, right?
right.
So even a boring story reveals God's glory. Um, and there's something to be taken from that. And everybody has that journey, whether it's big, small, it's something that you're going to be thrown on TBN for or CBN for, because you have this miraculous testimony or miracle that happened, or just a simple person who was obedient. There's so much power in that story. So never sell a testimony short. When it's true, when there's truth behind it. So who was that? Who was like your first artist that you were like, that's it? I connect with them.
So, I mean, I'll say the first artist that I actually connected with was Michael W. Smith, the Big Picture live album.
Okay.
And
So not the concert, but then the album dropped, and you're like, hey, this. There's something to this.
yeah. And then I heard a band called Striper that I was like, these guys are amazing. They look like women, but they're amazing.
Now, did you hear them from the Christian side or from the mainstream side at first?
Actually, a neighbor friend of mine, he was his parents were Christian, but he listened to Iron Maiden and Metallica and Slayer and all of those bands, and they bought him a Striper cassette, hoping that he'd like them, and he didn't, so he gave it to me, and so I heard Soldiers Under Command, and I was like, I was sold into it, and I started diving deeper into Striper. However, that same summer, my parents, we went to the Christian bookstore in Menor, and there was a thing called Hot Metal Summer that came out that had like Blood Good, Vengeance, Deliverance, Striper was on there, and maybe a couple other people, and it was a interview snippet and one of their songs. And out of all the bands that I like completely fell in love with was the band Vengeance. And so when that song came on, my parents were like, this can't be Christian. This cannot be Christian. So they tried to sway me any way possible out of listening to heavy metal music. Because back then, Satanic Panic was around, and you can't look like the world, you can't sing like the world. There's nothing wrong with that of like a Keith Green or a Rich Mullins. However, not everybody connects with those artists. And so at the same time, I was really into the band Striper. So my birthday was coming up, and Striper was coming on the In God We Trust tour. And my parents paid me not to go to the tour, not to go to the show. And it was at Public Hall.
So they essentially paid for the ticket that got you in,
so
they didn't want you to use on the ticket.
So my uncle, the brother of the uncle that
Was in the mob.
Moved back home, found Christ, and was trying to hook up with a woman from the church, and she had kids, so he took, who would then become my cousin Brandon, to go see Striper. He paid for the tickets. The money that my parents gave me to not go to the show
went to buy all the merch.
He goes, and you got to remember, he's a former mobster, so he's like, shh, we won't talk about it at all. We just go and have a good time, and you take that money and you buy your merchandise. So that's what I did, and my parents found out, and I would say that it was. So that was like, I want to say 87-ish, 88, around that time. And I'm trying to remember now. So go to the show. My parents got mad, but they understood. The band White Cross came into town, and I really wanted to go to the show. And my dad was like, you know what? I'll take you. It was at Newberry High School Auditorium. So back in the day, Christian bands really didn't play bars. They didn't play clubs. They didn't play theaters. They played high school gyms and theaters and churches. So my dad took me, and one, we heard this really amazing local band called Catalyst. And then White Cross came on. And sure enough, I thought my dad was going to say, we need to leave, because the opening song was a solo and it was just loud. And by the end of the show, my dad was sitting out in the car, and he ended up taking me. I got in the car and we left, and he told me that was awesome. That was amazing. He never thought that he would see a band of long-haired guys standing up on stage bringing a message in the middle of their set and praying with people and leading people to Christ. So that kind of changed him, which at the time we had moved from the Foursquare church to a church that was more of a cult church, because, I'm wearing a black shirt right now. I would be considered that I'm wearing death and hell because I'm wearing black. But he even stuck up with me with the pastors, because the next day after the show, we were at the church doing a work service day, and they were all mad that I was wearing a bunch of long-haired hippie men on my shirt. So that's how that started. But
well, let me stop you here. Let me get you to this. So you fell in love with the metal scene, and,
yes.
and Stryper was your thing.
Yes.
So there comes a band, and they're coming to Cleveland, and your life is about to change drastically. And it's a little band called DC Talk. And
yes.
I know this story. I don't know if our listeners know this story, but this is like one of the most pivotal, like, early beginnings of what we're about to talk about what you got into in the management side, to just how the music industry worked. So DC Talk comes on the scene. Take it away.
So DC Talk's on tour with Michael W. Smith. I got kicked out of Christian school. I have nothing else to do. My dad was kind of homeschooling me, but that wasn't working out. So my days were spent listening to music, reading magazines, and doing artwork.
And
so
skateboarding.
Yes, skateboarding. And so basically what happens is I get bored. I find out DC Talk's coming. It was part of their new thing, tour. And I call Forefront Records. Mind you, this is around 89.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can't remember how old I was.
So they're fresh. This is their second album, right?
Yeah, this is my second album. So
second album.
I'm about 13. I'm about 13 years old, I believe. 12 or 13. And I call their record company and I tell them, hey, there used to be a local Christian magazine called Wedge Music Magazine. And I read it every week or every time that it came out. And so I called the record company. I said, hey, my name is Doug. I am a writer for the Wedge Music Magazine, which I was not. And I asked to do an interview with DC Talk. They say, sure, you can do the interview with DC Talk. No one else has asked to do an interview with them. So mind you, I'm 12, 13 years old. I don't drive.
But he looks like he's 15.
Only because I had a beard and you were jealous.
It was not.
You know what's funny though? Just a side note, all of my kids have that problem now.
Mm-hmm.
Like Eli's 12 years old and has a darker mustache than me. And I'm like, boy, you got to start shaving that thing. But so I get this interview, and about a week or two later, I get a call, and this guy, his name's John Digman, and he has a really raspy voice, and I remember him calling me, he called my house. My parents answered, one of them, and so I pick up the phone, and he goes, "Hi, this is John Digman from the Wedge Music Magazine. I heard you write for us." And I said, stuttering, pooping my pants because I'm like just got caught in the biggest lie ever. And he said, so I'll make you a deal. He got to know me a little bit. He offered me a deal. He goes, I'll let you do the interview. I'm not going to take that away from you. However, it needs to be this many words. It has to be this laid out. And he gave me direction. And I still didn't have a ride to the concert. I lived in Cleveland. The concert was in Akron. So back then, it was pretty far away for a 12, 13-year-old. So I made friends with a local DJ by the name of John Palmer. And I asked him, or actually I told him what I was doing. And so I used to listen to his radio show every Saturday night, which was the alt rock, heavy metal, all the weird Christian music. And so he offered to take me. So he had all the equipment. We taped it. I wish I still had the tape. He may have it somewhere, but I went to go interview them, and they wouldn't let me in with him. And so I remember that the tour manager for the band had to come and get me and John, and they finally came and got me. And the interview ended up being Toby and Michael. And when they walked up, they're like, something's not right here. You're like 4. And I ended up doing the interview, and in the middle of the interview, Kevin Smith came up, and we were actually in the one balcony overlooking the stage. They were doing sound checks and stuff like that. So my first real dive into Christian music was a lie, based on a lie. So,
but you know what I see, especially, as we unpack your story, is the ambitious, that you were so ambitious to be able to achieve things. And that's what's going to happen next in your story. And obviously something that you made a promise to somebody later in life that goes right back to that ambition that God gave you, that he put that in you, that said, even when the odds were against you, Doug, that if you trust in me and believe in me, I can do good things through you. And I think that's what I think this part of that story, shared. So let's get right to the next part is, you don't graduate high school. Is that correct?
Correct.
So here
I dropped out in 9th grade.
Dropped out in 9th grade. Yeah. So what are you doing with yourself in 9th grade? You have,
I was 32.
You're 32
by your math of how
you would have been 17 at 9th grade, right? 16, 17.
So I dropped out in 91.
Okay.
91 or 92. And the DC Talk interview led me into doing other interviews and getting to know bands and getting to be part of the Christian music inner circle at such a young age. Most of my friends were 25, 30 years old. So we would spend our time doing Bible studies and doing worship outside the Arabica on Pearl Road in Parma. So again, being bored, I
Well,
And
life without social media, without internet access, this is you call what's bored. Hey, I want to do something, right? And you weren't just content playing
no,
with toys or video games or this. You actually were a mover and a shaker at a very young age, which most young people can't even fathom in their 30s.
right. So while doing those interviews, I figured I'm not seeing the bands that I like come through my area. So one of those bands was a band called Bride. And I called their manager. I booked a show, had a venue. It was the Franklin Station in Kent, which is now a BW3's. I booked a show for Halloween night, which was a Sunday. And through friends that I had made with a bunch of musicians and people, we got the sound, we got the lighting, we got the local opener. And I booked the band Bride in a venue that I wasn't old enough to actually be in. However, they allowed it to be an all ages show. And the band Bride drove up and they're like, we're here to see Doug. And I said, that's me. And they're like, oh, we're not unpacking our gear. This is going to end all sorts of bad. However, they didn't realize that I had the money. I paid them for right up front. They unloaded. They did a show. It was a huge success, and which led on to more shows. And the next group that I did was the band Guardian. Then I worked on I finally worked on a Striper show that had Bride opening up for them at the Canton Palace Theater, and so on and so forth. The one defining moment though was I brought Bride in to during their Snakes in the Playground tour, and I had death threats from groups. I had people protesting, and there used to be, I don't know if they're still around, but they used to be called King's Kids. They were a Christian biker gang. They came and did security. They protected me while I did the show. And we ended up doing, I want to say about 100 people got saved that night. But that was the defining moment of the start of my actual ministry into this. I wanted to see people come to know Christ. I wanted people to change their lives. And so that show, which had the band Crux and Weeping Prophet, also brought in a band called DOC, who just recorded a song with Bride. And it was the one and only time that they ever did that song live together. So, I mean, I dropped out and I was doing shows. I was going on the road with bands. But at that time,
so were you developing, did you have at this point, did you have close friends, or were you sort of just affiliated with the bands? I mean, were you like really tight with them, like friends? Like you eventually became really good friends with so many different, people and bands and artists.
Over the years, because I would bring them in so often because there was no one else doing these kind of shows. And, I mean, me and my friend Andre, we would travel to go see them to like Columbus or Cincinnati or wherever after they played our show. So
were you getting? So let's take it back. So you did have a desire for ministry with these shows,
correct?
You being out of school now, because of you should be a high school student, but you're not.
Right.
But you're doing all this stuff. You're living at home still, right? Were you making money off of the shows? Was that a goal of yours? Was it like?
It was never a goal. It was just to do a show. It was to be fun and see a band that I know that doesn't come around here. No one else is doing it, so why not?
So when did that switch for you to go from, like, let's say, here you are as a young kid, unscathed by you know, Christian conflicts, theology battles, all of these different things that murk the waters within the faith, which make us just all go, ugh, I'm good. I don't want to have nothing to do with it. You're just a bright-eyed young kid who's seeing God move in places where you fit in, right? Maybe you didn't fit in all church settings. This was like where you were really you were in your element, right?
Yeah.
Doing shows, seeing real ministry happen, seeing kids who don't know who God is, hearing music, hearing somebody speak, really could speak to them in that manner. This is your element. When did you start to move to this direction? Because here's the next part of your story, is, as you start moving towards the management side and creating your own label, which wasn't just ministry, it was a business as well,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So roughly about 1990, I want to say 94, it started to become a business. It started, I was making and losing money on shows. And there was a rise in the music scene that had changed the landscape of it, which was a record company called Tooth and Nail Records. And there was a bunch of bands, because I listened to some secular music even when I was a Christian. And so I was really into punk, hardcore, thrash metal, and all that kind of stuff. So I started doing shows at that point that it was still for ministry, but it was about, this is what I do and make a living, instead of working a 9 to 5 or going and working in the mall.
Now, was this the start of No Compromise at this point?
So yes and no. So this is when I did.
Well, let's pause right there. So this whole, what you did for day jobs before you did work at, all your different Christian music stores, correct? Is that also,
Well,
or is that
so
coming later?
that stuff came later.
Okay, so you haven't even done anything like job wise in.
I worked at Original Cookie Company at Randall Park Mall.
Okay.
But that was only because my mom ran it and I had a job whenever I wanted to work. So I worked that job to pay for, the shows. And so basically what happened was I meet all these bands, Mortal, The Blamed, P.O.D.
And what's funny is you never had a chance to bring in Scattered Few, and never even got a chance to meet Alan during all of those years, because you mentioned all the bands he's super tight with, Mortal, and so all these other bands that you would bring in, and you're friends with all these guys, and at the same time, they're all good friends with Alan.
I had never met Alan. I was a huge Scattered Few fan. I mean, they were one of my favorite bands.
Yeah, the first time you met Alan was Take on the World 2018.
Yeah, at Beulah Beach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. So that was an odd moment.
Yeah, and you were like sitting with him for like 2 hours. Yeah. He wasn't letting him go. He's like, "Who is this guy? Get this guy away from." No, he didn't say that.
But the funny thing is that, at our age now, we had so many common friends that he knew I wasn't a BS. I wasn't BSing him.
Yeah.
Because people can say they know this person, they know that person, but do you? So I have mad respect for Alan, and it was just one of those weird. I'm meeting the infamous Alan Aguirre.
Right. Well, here's a picture. People probably can't see it too well.
It's actually behind me, right?
Yeah, it's right behind you. I actually put that together for Doug, by the way. So these are his posters that he did back in those days. There's the Bride posters, the Guardian, all the different bands he was bringing in. Some of the things later, 1995, the Alternative Fest. You did your own festivals back in the day. So this was in the era of, youth groups and the eras of you could pass these things out and people would come because there was nothing to do,
Right.
and you would, it was, especially in Christian culture, it was like this was what you did, to meet people, to go places, right?
So technically the music that I listened to and worked in was taboo in Christian scenes. The church
wasn't on the radio, right?
No, and you had maybe
a midnight show or something,
yeah.
right? The college radio, yeah.
So, I mean, getting to know some of the bands like you asked, we grew friendships because go to festivals like Alive and Cornerstone, and you end up hanging out with them. You end up selling merch for them for the week or whatever, and you just gain a friendship with these guys. And it's weird now because they are friends. Like, we've had on past shows like Jimmy Brown of Deliverance, and that guy used to sit and talk to a 12, 13-year-old kid and minister to him. And he walked me through some of the worst times of my life. However, he would say some of the same things about me. So that to me just is odd, because these guys were on so many people's pedestals like they were their idols. So in 94, I did Alterna Fest. And then in 95, I did Alterna Fest again. During that time, I started doing working with an unknown band called Zayo. And I had friends in the band 6 Feet Deep. And we ended up, I ended up working with Tom Dunn, who everybody knows. I mean, I met Tom through all of this back in like 89, 90.
Because Tom was also putting on concerts too.
Years after I started.
Mm-hmm.
But because I remember meeting Tom the first time I met Tom, he had this vampire ministry, and where he went and ministered to vampires. And we ended up striking up like a conversation. He was one of the coolest guys I had known in the area. So yeah, he started doing shows, I want to say in like mid to late 90s. I could be wrong. That's his history. But he lived in Mansfield. So Mansfield was like, could be 5,000 hours away from us. So Tom and I gained a friendship, but I want to say around 1996, I started a label.
It was 97, right? You started No Compromise 97? Or you started the working on it?
The working on it started in 96.
Okay.
And it was me and Bobby Canaday from the band Unashamed, which was a Christian hardcore band. And we wanted to be not Tooth and Nail, because Tooth and Nail was about money. And Tooth and Nail was
organized, right? Because at Tooth and Nail, you could have one artist in the band that was a Christian, and right, as long as they put out good quality punk rock, alternative, showgaze, all sorts of different styles, as long as you were cool enough to be on the label, you were there.
As long as you had one Christian artist or one right, Christian member. And
so that's where the name of No Compromise comes from. You weren't going to be.
Well, I ripped it off of Keith Green because I had read Keith Green's biography. Okay. And I'm like, that's the life. Giving out music, doing free shows, bringing people to Christ. However, you need money to do that. That artwork is so old. And the original artist, Keith Kanya, hates that stuff. He's like, that's so old. I ran into him a few years back, but
But
However,
you can't, you know what? When you look back at hand drawn art like that,
yeah,
you can't beat it. You really can't beat the nostalgic feel of that, about that. And you know what? It is, I love that message. Now let me take you back to, let me jump in here real quick.
okay.
So I graduated in 1997. You're starting a label in 1997.
Mind you, I got married in 97 too.
So me and Doug didn't see each other from 8th grade on. So he left the school. I had no clue what Doug was doing. I had no feet in the Christian music world whatsoever until a few years later. And that's how, when we get to that point, how we even rekindled our friendship again. We were off each other's radars. You didn't talk to probably anybody from the old school. That was all a blur. That was a path. That was, here you are, 1997, which also was the year that one of your artists graduated high school as well, which was John Rubin.
Yes.
So here you are starting No Compromise as a premise to Keith Green's No Compromise, to not being watered down like a Tooth and Nail Records,
Right.
but being something that was, let's say, unashamed.
Yes.
Unashamed. 116. before Lecrae, you were No Compromise, which is the whole theme of that you weren't going to back down from, about this being about Christ.
Correct. And so having actually, I want to say it was 97 that we were starting to have Bobby and I kind of, it's hard to go back and remember a lot of the stuff, but so Bobby and I didn't know exactly what kind of bands that we were going to sign or what we were going to do. I mean, Bobby was kind of the A&R guy along with me. I mean, it was just the two of us. So we started dabbling in, trying to find bands from other cultures and other areas of the United States other than California, Seattle, and New York area. And one of our first signings, oddly enough, was a band called the Juliana Theory. And basically, that was, at that time, it was a huge signing because it had members of Zayo and I forget what other band members were in that band at the time, but it was Brett Detter from Zayo, which was huge at that time. If you know anything about hardcore and metal, Zayo was a very big influential band back then, and they still are.
But they've compromised.
Yes. So, yeah, we won't. We can get into that because I brought Zayo in 1,000 times, and
but you also had Steerwell, correct?
So it went Juliana Theory, and then they were going to be our first band that we signed, and they were going to be our first album. However, Tooth and Nail got wind of it, and they offered me some money for them, and so we sold them, not much money, as like maybe $5,000 or something like that, which in our minds was big money. So that year at Cornerstone,
and compared to what Juliana Theory did on Tooth and Nail,
let's not even talk about that.
Yeah.
So I got married, and on my honeymoon, we went to Cornerstone, which would probably be the reason why I'm divorced from that woman now. I took her to Cornerstone for our honeymoon, but I ended up meeting an artist that was different. He was a very different artist, and he was more to the tune of the kind of hip hop that I was listening to. And his name is Dirt, or in this circle, Jeremiah Dirt. He had signed a deal with the label that P.O.D was on, and he was working with them at the time. And so I ended up becoming his manager. And through that time, we book shows and all that kind of stuff. I didn't even think about him being on the label at that time because he was with Rescue Records. And so at the same time, I had met through working at a Christian bookstore, which was called Psalm 150. I ended up meeting a distributor who knew the guys from the band Poor Old Lou and some of the bands that had already left Tooth and Nail Records. And so through that, we made connections, and one of the bands was the band Stairwell, which happened to be Kevin Chen. At the time, was Kevin Chen from the Supertones, Neil Samoy, who is now or was in Stavesaker, now in Focused, and several other bands. And two brothers, well, I can't remember their names at the moment, that were in a band called Bloodshed that was a Tooth and Nail band. And if anybody listened to Tooth and Nail Records back then, Bloodshed was huge because they were a bunch of little kids playing hardcore music and it was amazing. So I signed Stairwell, and we got busy working on their record. I got them on a tour with Michael Knott, who tragically passed away earlier this year. And that's really how it began.
So you also ended up signing the Subculture Deviants.
Well, so Stairwell was first, then Subculture Deviants.
And that was a hip-hop duo from Ohio, right? Well, one was from Ohio, one wasn't, correct?
Well, no, both of them were here in Ohio.
Okay, both of them. And that's and is that how you ended up meeting John, is through Subculture?
No, actually, I met John at Cornerstone 98.
Okay. So, and John was an official. So John Rubin, everybody may know John because he was signed to Toby Mac's label, Goatee Records. And that same type of scenario, right? Just like with the Juliana Theory, Brandon and the team
at least Brandon paid.
Correct. So here's Toby and Joey and these guys, right? They see John Rubin at a showcase that you put on, correct?
Yes,
in Nashville.
Because at the time, I was managing a group called Brainwash Projects, 3MP.
Agent John and B Twice.
Yeah, and then 3MP, which had MG the Visionary, and gosh, who else was there?
Dirt was there,
and Dirt was there, but there were
some rock bands. I have the fly. Actually here. Hold on. Hold on. 1 second.
It was a long time ago, people, so I tend to not remember. I did 2 showcases that week at the Gospel Music Week. Where did Chris go?
So here it is, April 19th.
Oh, wow.
April 19th, you had Dirt, John Rubin, Frost T,
oh my gosh,
3MP, Subculture Deviants, and then on the next day, and you had Illustrate. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yep, you had Illustrate, and then you had Stairwell, and you had a hardcore show the next night.
Yes.
And that's Dirt in the background there.
Yes. So Dirt this
was the Nashville show. So did Toby and all the Goatee, did they show up to this?
So the people that showed up to that show was the guys from Gretz, Toby Mac, Steve Taylor. These unbeknownst to me, all these other record companies were looking at John. And I mean, when I saw John at Cornerstone, I knew that he was a diamond in the rough. He was different than most artists at that time in the Christian hip hop realm. So he actually knew how to rap. He actually knew how to battle. He knew the hip hop scene. Say like Dirt. Dirt was an underground artist, so they had a different presence, and that's what I liked about him. And John was a no nonsense person as far as ministry back then. So
yeah, was John performing with people at that time, or was it just him solo?
So at Cornerstone,
or no, at your show, at this GMA show?
Oh, it was him and a couple of the guys from the Showcase MCs.
Was that Alon or?
I think it was Alon, and I know Manny.
Manny was
the DJ.
And Vocab would have been much younger, right?
Probably, yeah. Actually, I think Vocab. I'm not sure how old Vocab actually is. Vocab, dude, that was so long ago, and such
a so now tell the story. So here you are. This is your showcase.
Yes,
you're showcasing all of these artists. Either you manage them or they're on your label.
Correct.
Right.
And at that time, we were trying to get a distribution deal
because you didn't sign MG and 3NP, but you were managing MG at that point as well.
Right. Yes.
So okay. So what occurs and happens and goes down this night that John Rubin is no longer about to drop his debut? Now, if you go back, Doug has a No Compromise compilation album that you put out, and John's got 2 songs on that record, and that was recorded from here. Were those recorded here in Ohio, or were those or with you here in Spider Studios, or is that a different record?
That's a different record.
Okay. So that one never saw the light of day.
No, all I know is that one day I was at work. I get a call from Ben Schlegel from Spider Studios, and he said, "Hey, heads up, your boy John Rubin just came in here and took his masters and left." And I'm like, "Well, wait a minute, I paid you for those masters. Those aren't his to take." And he said we weren't going to keep them from him, and I didn't know what was going on. And so at the same time, I had a band called Narcissist that was signed to the label, and I had Dirt, John, and Narcissist about to drop records, and we had a distribution deal finally, and all of a sudden the flagship artist is gone and I can't get a hold of him. Come to find out that he's gone to Nashville and he signed a deal with Goatee Records, and the rest for him is history.
And that hindered your relationship. And did that because you guys were close, right? You guys are friends and
friends. We hung out all the time. I mean, I would drive out. I drive out to Columbus to pick him up to come and spend days here in Cleveland with me. So
there's a picture where you guys were hanging out with 12th Tribe, right?
Yeah, this is at if you're going to show that.
I can't find the picture, so I'll try.
Thank God, that was my blonde days.
Yeah, I do actually have a picture of not John, but I do have a picture of you, and because somehow John got cut from the picture.
Stop it.
Yeah, John's right next to you, but there's the guys from one of the guys from 12th Tribe, right? So there's Doug. So here you are, but I think this was the start, and this is the bad part, right? For you, hey, you lost John, and now you're going into some other things. But let's be honest, Doug. I mean, when I started to come around the music industry, there's all these grumblings, right? Like hey, don't do business with Doug. Doug's a bad guy, and this
So
happened, that happened, right?
I'll tell
I mean,
you.
before we get there, there's a lot to unpack there. But here you are, Doug. I want to take something back too. You know, you were about no compromise. Um, Now you're newly married, and you mentioned something about Cornerstone Festival.
Yes.
Um, you know, you told me the first time that you ever did any type of hardcore drug was at Cornerstone Festival.
Correct.
And how and so this is like the dark side that nobody talks about, because I guarantee you if you were doing it and you got exposed to it there, how many of the artists were doing that kind of stuff at a festival like that? And if it and that's and we know Cornerstone's probably the grungiest of grungy types of festivals, very liberal, very, whatever they let people in. um what was the scene like behind the scenes? Because people are people, right? Just like when you talked about Jimmy Brown saying here he's talking to a 13, 14-year-old kid, but people are people, right? You know um nobody should be put on pedestals, because at the end of the day we all fall short, and we're all just humans. But just like that, I mean, we know Michael W. Smith's story, how he was involved with cocaine during those elite years with Amy Grant, right? We mentioned that concert earlier. And he went on to mention that he was involved in that stuff. DC Talk, Kevin Max was heavily involved in drugs and sex.
Very much so.
He writes about that. What was it like for you, trying to be no compromise, but seeing compromise everywhere you were at, that even led to, the sins of your father, right? Here you are, coming from that, seeing all that as a kid, to now doing some of this stuff at these things, so now, that's like the darker side that nobody ever talks about.
Well, yeah, I mean, it definitely was the darker side, but it's not something that I expected to be in, as far as like, so when I would go to Cornerstone Festival, I had all access passes, which allowed me to go anywhere and everywhere on basically the fairgrounds or the campus of Cornerstone. And I ended up hanging out backstage in one of the artist trailers with Gene Eugene, and he was a huge producer. He's famous for
Everything.
pretty much any and everything that came from the alt rock to hip hop to hardcore, and he owned one of the major studios, that recording studios that was in Christian music, called the Green Room. And so, you get to hang out with a guy like him. It's like you're in awe. I mean, it's Gene Eugene. Now, Gene's a great guy. Spent many of time with Gene Eugene. But the first time I smoked dope was with Gene Eugene, which led to other things that at that time, doing, I won't say that Gene Eugene, and I won't name the band because I'm going to see them this summer, but
They know who they are.
they know who they are. Let's just say that it was a band that used to hang out with Gene Eugene all the time. And Gene was in a band with one of the members. That's as far as I'll go. But it wasn't peer pressure, but it was just one of those things. It was, and passing around. And, I blame myself. I was weak at that moment. But that was in 1994.
So that started even earlier, before you even got to No Compromise. So now let's flash forward.
That's one of the reasons.
Yeah. So in 1997, were you, when you started No Compromise, were you still actively doing drugs or things like that that were still strongholds from that period?
No. I was clean, sober, um, married, or getting married, depending on what time of year it was. And I basically decided that I was tired of the selfishness and the lying um, to the kids in the market. So that's why I started No Compromise, was to change that outlook.
So did you have like a statement? By the way, your camera, if you want to turn it
Yeah,
off.
I noticed that
Yeah,
because I think all my children are on the internet.
gotcha. So let me ask you this: with No Compromise, did you have like a statement of faith that they needed to sign that dealt with the non-use of drugs and alcohol, those types of things? Was that like part of the no being a part of No Compromise in those early days?
So yeah, when you signed a No Compromise, you agreed to do Bible studies. You agreed to. I mean, I wish I had one of the contracts. You agreed to live a clean lifestyle. Every member of the band had to be Christian. And give me 1 second. Can I jump out?
Yeah.
I'm back in.
Yep. You should. Yeah, you'll be fine. So I'll use this opportunity at the 11:30. So we still got a little bit more to unpack. We'll try to get it all wrapped up in the next 30 minutes or so. But yeah, we'll be coming back with some new flat out insights. Me and Michael have been working on stuff for quite some time. So hopefully you guys are going to stay tuned for that. We'll be back with a fresh episode of Sound Off with Robbie and Johnny and Doug, where we're going to be just sounding off on all the craziness of things going on in the world, some of the things that happened in Christian music world, to political scene, to just about anything and everything coming up. So we have some stuff that we're working on coming to take on the world, and pray for us as we look at what is the next direction. Is there a possibility of returning to a live event? 2025 sounds really nice as a number. As we know, our days are numbered in this world, and I don't know how much we have left. So here we go. We got Doug back in here. All right.
Sorry about that. I had to move to my phone.
That's all right. So no, I was just updating there on potentially looking at if there's an opportunity for Take on the World 2025. So maybe, just maybe, and maybe that might be the swan song. Maybe it ends on a really nice note.
Let's make it happen, Chris.
Yeah, it's not. Hey, the ball's not been in my court for a long time. I'm not putting it in my court. It is. It is all. We are waiting for doors to open, and if he opens doors, we will take them. So here we are. So this is where we're at with No Compromise.
So
we're gonna try to speed up and get to
all right.
get to some meat here. So No Compromise is rocking and rolling, but it's not, because we got artists being stolen, taken from you. You find yourself in financial distress from the company, correct?
Yes, so I signed a distribution deal, and we put out the Stairwell and Subculture Deviant records, and we sold a lot. From what I understand, I never have seen a dime because the distribution company closed up in the middle of the night and stole every record company's money that they had. And to this day, I don't know where the rest of the albums are as far as the CDs go. They probably were auctioned off to somebody to sell them on eBay or something. So at that time, I was in the middle of recording Jeremiah Dirt's awarded restore record, and to get out from under a lot of the bills that I had from, because each record paid for the next record. It wasn't like I had tens of thousands of dollars just sitting around in the bank. It was a DIY situation, and we basically were flying by the seat of our pants. By that time, Bobby had left the record company, and it was pretty much me and just me. I had some creative artist people that were doing my artwork and stuff like that, but it really was just me doing the day-to-day stuff, while trying to raise a family. At that time, my ex-wife, not at that time was my wife. We were having a baby, and so a lot was going on. Fast forward to 1999, and we were doing the Dirt record. We were going on the road. We were on the road a lot during 1999, 2000, and 2001. And I went out with the
But by the
artist.
time 99 comes around, No Compromise is pretty much over at this point.
No.
You don't have any artists. Do you have any artists signed?
So in 2000 is when it kind of like kerplunk.
So is this the years, because of business decisions, because of how things work? Is this where you got sort of the bad rap in the industry of don't work with Doug, and people tried to blackball you from this company or that company or this label because of just bad business dealings that you got screwed on, that ultimately the artist didn't get what they really wanted, so they looked for somebody to blame, and it was always you?
So yes, but that also came about with doing concerts and stuff like that. So when I did Alternafest 95, there was issues that put me on a bad cycle with the band MXPX and the Prayer Chain, and
they were influential at different labels, so
yeah,
that also probably
so they knew everybody, and they tried to badmouth me, but however, it people saw through the situation. So a lot of people saw through that situation. However, by the time No Compromise was folding, it was no fault of our own. And having to explain to bands like Stairwell and Subculture why they're not getting paid or getting their royalties and stuff like that, it kind of stinks. But my wife will tell you that we hired a couple years later, we hired a private investigator to try to track down the guy who owned the distribution company. So there's a lot of inner workings that people don't realize.
Mm-hmm.
And we never promised the world to people, but we always tried to make our yeses yeses and our noes noes.
Yeah, and like in the case with John Rubin, all you felt was fair with was that, just like with Tooth and Nail when they purchased Juliana Theory, was that they would have done the same thing because
they pay me for what I've invested in.
Yeah, and at least allow you to release his album that you paid for, or work on it together with him. Maybe that's something. And I think that hindered. I know you and John. When you saw each other, you did a show with him. One of your last shows you did, was the Britt Nicole, Hawk Nelson, John Rubin show, and you guys hit it off, and you guys relived old times. But it was.
Do you remember what year that was? Was that like 2010 or 11?
It would have been about 2010. Yeah.
So you're talking over 10 years that John and I never talked to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an awkward situation because I knew, I booked the tour. And so I'm like, I'm going to have to run into him at some point at the
Yeah.
show. And honestly, we hugged it out, talked it out, and left it at that. And for a minute there, we were talking on the phone. We were talking about John possibly going out on the road with Dirt at the time, um, just even a few years ago, just to do some dates.
But I think if in all honesty, Doug, I think if John Rubin would have stayed with you, he would have
He
had
would never have gotten as big as he did.
correct. He would have had an underground following. He would have been like Marzil, right? He would have had a great sub cult following because he would have put out different style hip hop.
Yeah.
But he went to Goatee, became youth group friendly, and was on every major tour in Christian music industry. He was along with KJ. They were the faces of Christian hip hop till Lecrae came along. So, he did real well for himself in that era. So,
but even John will tell you that he wished he would have stuck.
Artistically, I bet John would have wished he would have stayed with you. Yeah.
Yes, because I was allowing him to be who he was.
Yeah. Financially,
no,
getting a name. Yeah, exactly. So you know what? I think you know what this does, Doug. The way God handles these situations in our lives, no matter if we're talking music industry, whether we're talking, past jobs or things that that happened in our lives, where we felt we got done wrong on something, there's ultimately God seeing our best interest in them, letting things go, and then we still hold on to those grudges when God is sitting back like, I pulled you away from something, even though you now think you got screwed in it, but you're in a better position than you would have been if you would have stayed. And I think so many people always want to pull that out, that sometimes in these situations that God's doing something, and it may not always look super pretty, but we got to keep that in mind, because we can hold grudges to family members, to work situations, but you know what? God has us covered when we're walking in his ways. And I think it's a beautiful thing, because it's not pretty, and it's not what it looks like it should be, but it ends up being what it absolutely should be. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it definitely, that whole situation was a turning point in my life. And so, however, you fast forward, the label folds, but I'm still on the road with Dirt. He ended up moving here to Cleveland, lived with me and my family for a short time with his family, and then they moved to Spokane, Washington, and then that was kind of it, because I sold Dirt's record to Syntax Records, and honestly, we've talked about this at length. They didn't hold up to their end of the bargain. They never paid me fully what they were supposed to pay me, and they never held up to their contractual stuff. But that's just the music business. I had to say that it taught me that you couldn't trust anybody, whether they were Christian or not. Actually, I had more trust in secular artists and secular people, because after all of this happened, I ended up leaving the Christian market and going and working in the secular market, and working with a ton of some of the biggest artists in music, even to this day. At one point, you could walk into a Hot Topic and look at the back wall of band T-shirts, and I'd have to say 95% of the bands that were on that wall I worked with at some point. So I got out of the Christian industry because it became.
Well, let me ask you, when you transitioned over, because you still dabbled in the Christian world.
Yes.
but you were still, like you worked for Peabody's. You did a lot of work in some of these, these local, clubs over here. Was this when your marriage started going on the rocks?
So Dirt and I finished a tour in November of, I want to say 2000. In 2001, I did a concert at a place called the Blind Lemon with the band Zayo, and the show was so successful that the venue asked me to run the venue. And during that time is I found out my wife at the time was cheating on me. And so we went through a divorce, and oddly enough, I met my now wife of almost 23 years at the Blind Lemon. So that's obviously God's maneuvering in that aspect. Maybe not for her, but for me, it was God's maneuvering. And while I worked in these venues, I still did Christian bands. However, it wasn't about ministry. It was about making money. And everything came to a halt on September 11th, and we had to shut down the venue for.
Because one of the bands that was an interesting story too. I mean, we don't have to spend time talking about it, but you were super close to P.O.D. And September 11th, like their story when they were about to drop their record on September 11th, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, here you are, Doug. Let's take this back. Let's just recap for the listeners. Here you are, a grow up in a home that is part of the Sicilian mob, connected to who knows what mob affiliations. God finds your father, brings him to his knees, gets saved, and the family follows. Here you are, stealing an interview, faking an interview to get with DC Talk, to open up the doorways for you to go, you know what? I'm not, as a high school dropout, jumps knee deep. I mean, look, we could look at all of these things in the Christian music world, and like, hey, you look at back as a failure of, because we didn't make it, or we didn't have enough successful years. You were a kid. I mean, my goodness. I mean, you were a kid doing all of these things with no guidance. You didn't have other labels come in and say, Doug, let me show you how to properly run your books, or let me show you who not to work with. You were on your own doing all this stuff.
Yep.
And then now people from the past, other kids who were in bands at the time, who they don't understand management, probably had poor management. Here you are going through all of these things. Then you have a failed marriage because your wife is cheating on you, probably because you're workaholic, right? I mean,
Yep.
that played into it, I'm sure. You have a child who then, is we're going to tell that story, that story. And what I want you guys to do, we're not going to tell that full story. We have an episode of Sound Off where that full story is really told, that I want you guys to go back to and really watch that, because we can't do it justice in the short of a time. But it became your next thing, because as you're leaving your marriage, your daughter is now diagnosed with brain cancer.
So I get divorced, I get married, I have a kid. My now new wife and I have a kid together, which is our oldest. His name's Ian. He's 19. Some of you have seen him walking around the Take on the World stuff. And I'm still doing music. I'm still at that time I was managing MG the Visionary, Noetic. There's just too many bands to name that I was working with at the time. My daughter was diagnosed with brain cancer. Um, we have I want to say he was 16 months, or that might have been Mason. However, we have a little kid, a daughter who was just diagnosed with brain cancer, had to go in for an emergency surgery, and they took a navel-sized orange tumor out of the back of her head, and she was in a coma. Didn't know if she was going to survive that. All throughout this time, I, I don't, I'm not, I don't have a high school degree, so I don't have good jobs. So I can still continue to do music to make money, and primarily working with secular artists, and some Christian artists that have gone kind of secular. And fast forward to 2010, after my daughter was in remission and doing well, she gets a second brain cancer that ultimately took her life. But at that time, I was, I had worked for a chain of cell phone stores, and
Let's stop you there. Come back to that, because how we got back in touch.
oh yeah,
was so here you are, 2004. So this is occurring. So by 2006, I'm putting my foot in the arena. I'm becoming Doug Kirchner. I'm super passionate about the Christian music industry. I'm helping you, in youth group. I'm doing all this kind of stuff. I'm booking shows. One of the shows that I booked drew the attention of this guy named Doug, and he's managed a guy named MG. I do this show. It's Marzil, DJ Maj of Toby Mac, and Pigeon John, and we have it at our church at the time, and because I'm managing an artist at the time as well, and so he's one of the opening acts, and then I get this message from this guy. His name's Doug, and he says, "Hey, I represent this guy named MG the Visionary." I'm like, of course I know who MG the Visionary is. And he's like, "Hey, I want MG to be an opening act on your new thing." And I remember MG having like some type of web page. I can't remember what it was. If it was like mp3.com page, something like that he had. And because obviously I picked up the, his
probably was the MySpace.
It wasn't the MySpace. It was a little different. I can envision what it looked like, but it wasn't MySpace. And so I have Transparency, I have Sinner's Prayer, so I'm super familiar with him, even though I'm super late to the game. I'm listening to this stuff, 2002, and this stuff came out much earlier. I wasn't listening to any Christian music at all, and I sped up really, really fast. Like I threw away all my secular music. If you watch the shows, I got rid of everything. So of course I'm hearing 50 mil, and I'm like, dude, this is his best stuff ever, and it's not. He's not on a record label anymore, and you're like, hey, he lives at Cuyahoga Falls, which we're in Cleveland, area, and so we're like 45 minutes away. And so you're like, hey, I would like to talk to you on the phone, and you're like, I saw your name, and your name was Chris Bailey. You happen to go to, and this all through email, and did you happen to go to Southwest Christian? And mind you, this is like, we hadn't seen each other since 8th grade. I'm married. Doug's twice married, ran a record label, has a kid. This is 2006. And so, and mind you, this is probably 20 years ago since we probably seen each other at the time.
Right.
And all of a sudden, that is when, 2006, we get much closer. We become friends. I get to meet your family. I get to, back then we didn't have kids, so we could travel to come see you guys like more than sometimes more than once a month. We would come out and visit with you guys, but we'd always talk on the phone late at night. Now we never see each other because we both have families and never can get. So if we see each other, it's on video, even though we're 45 minutes away from each other. It feels like there's a much more bigger difference. It's like when you were trying to get to the DC Talk conference as a 12-year-old kid, and Akron, Ohio, where you kind of live, sort of in that area. I'm trying to figure out how the heck I can get over there, and I can drive, and you couldn't drive. So it was instrumental for both of us, right? MG came on the show, and then we rekindled that. So and I think that's a God thing, right? God, God was moving, because by the time you get to now 2010, and think about it. We only had a few short years, spending with your family before Skylar passed.
Right.
And so, it was very difficult, watching Al, your family, watching you, watching all of these things happen, and we're close to the situation in some more ways than one. And then as we talk, I'm hearing all your stories, all these things. I'm being blown away because now I'm this Christian music nerd, and you were the guy who lived all this stuff, and you're like, dude, I don't even like this stuff anymore because you're so burnt out dealing with this. So now let's take us back to 2010. Now you have a much bigger family. So God's moved in a lot of ways, right? Because you had an ex-wife. You had to share custody with your daughter all those years. So you had, wasn't always pleasant with her. So you holding grudges, right? And on both sides of the party, and but God's working. He brings you the helpmate that He always had planned for you, in Katie.
Yes.
And brings you, 3 other boys at the same time.
Yeah. So we in 2010, by that time we had Mason, who's our middle kid, who's now 14, and oddly enough, Katie was pregnant with our third child, who was supposed to be a girl, as far as what my daughter said to us, and we already picked out a name, and so Eli was supposed to be oh my gosh, I forget the name now, but Lily Harper was going to be Eli's name. But God blessed us with Eli, but he wasn't born yet, so he never got to meet her. So in 2010, we were told that she that there was something growing on her brain. They didn't know what it was, so they were going to wait until that was in October, and they were going to wait until January to see if it grew again. So it did, and so they did an emergency biopsy, which is just cutting open her head again and taking a biopsy of it, and the biopsy took longer than they had expected, or than what they originally had told us, and we were in the hospital for like 7-8 days. And they came and told us that she had stage 3, stage 4 astrocytoma glioma. And there's, at that time, I don't even think Google was around then. But I remember looking up the World Health Organization or whatever it was, or one of the sites that, and I read there's no cure. There's no cure for it. So the doctor came and talked with us, and he told me she's got 12 to 18 months to live. And that's how advanced and rapid that cancer is. So um, everything in our life shut down at that time. I had owned a chain of cell phone stores, and we shut everything down and took care of her. She, in the last 6 months of her life, I basically lived at my parents' house again. Just me, not my whole family. It was me and her because she wanted to live at my mom's house and have me take care of her.
But that also during that period too, that also, because you were heavily involved in, your cell phone stores that ultimately, fell apart due to all of this.
Yep.
You had to file bankruptcy on those. But you also started to do tribute, like shows for Skylar during this time. So, which was sort of going back to some of your roots of,
Right.
of planning some shows, doing some things that were donations and some of those different things. And luckily enough, through some of the different organizations, Make a Wish, she got to really have some really great vacations with you guys at the end.
So in 2006 we did our Make a Wish trip, and once you do a Make a Wish trip, if you get cancer again, they're like, sorry folks, there's no Make a Wish after that, which is understandable. Um, However, there was so much that happened between October of 2010 and November of 2011, and um, we ended up doing shows, raising money. Um, School raised money. There, so many people just loved my daughter, so they we were able to take a 3 week trip that took us down to Disney, Pigeon Forge, and Myrtle Beach to spend time with my sister and her family at the time. And by the time we came back from that, she started getting really sick, and her body just started giving up. And that was in May, around May and June. And she passed away in November of that year. However, one of the biggest things that, and to this day, it's still one of the most amazing things, is we now had social media, which then garnered, um, you know, the guys in P.O.D. And the whosoevers, uh, just sending out prayers. And we were getting letters from people from Israel. We were getting letters from people from all over the world that were part of the whosoever movement, just praying for Skylar and sending, you know, I mean, I remember getting this beautiful wind chime. Um, and, you know, one of the things that was told to me was Sonny said from POD that they went to Israel, and while they were in Israel, he wrote her name in a piece of paper and put it in the Wailing Wall, which to me that's like straight biblical. It's like the Wailing Wall. And for me, even though I was kind of out of the scene but still in the scene, because I still had my friends that were part of the music scene, but I was kind of far removed from it because the last thing I had done was I think the Britt Nicole and John Rubin and Hawk Nelson show, and that was in 2010. And we ended up, she passed away, but before she passed away, you know, one day we were talking. She asked me about what I want to do when I grew up, and I started laughing because at that time I was like 35 years old, and I'm like, I'm grown, kid. And I told her I never graduated high school. And she said, well, not, she didn't even skip a beat. She was plain talking. And she goes, well, when I die, promise me you'll go get your GED because you'll have the time. And I made that promise to her. So I only had the aspirations of getting my GED. And when I was done getting my GED, I decided to go sign up for the police academy. And none of that really worked out. So I ended up um, meeting somebody through the GED group partnership that I had done, which was Project Learn. Um, got me into. I had to go for a week long thing at Kent State, and by the time I knew it, I ended up signing up for college, and I was going. I was going to college, which I never thought would be anything for me. So I ended up going for 4 years of school, working full time, actually more than full time. That's when we were talking like almost every night because I needed somebody to keep me awake. And you're a night owl, and I ended up getting my 4 year degree, my GED, and then my master's all within um, like 6 year, 5 6 years of each other.
Yeah. I'll tell you, this picture, I'm getting a little feedback from my side. This picture, was the Sweet 16 birthday party you done for her, that she never obviously got to 16, but you did that. And um, I think this was a culmination of everything that that she meant to you, and that where you are today, and that's what we'll get into next after that, of leading and getting you back to that ambition, where you were able to graduate, were you able to keep that promise, but were you were really able to go back to being who you were when you were that kid, to have that 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 unshakable faith that you can do anything if he's on your side. And what that has led into, obviously you don't work in the Christian music industry now, and you know you do this Christian music show where we reminisce on stories from the past, um, and but
I
real
try to get back into it and dabble in it, and it just doesn't seem like that door opens that much. But
I mean, doing some fun things here and there. You know what? In a dying industry, the way, especially how you knew it, um, it's really the artist and the artist alone. Labels have taken a step back. Shows are non-existent unless if they're the big, massive shows. You
right.
know, there isn't really scenes like there was that we had when we were there. But now you get to do something which takes you back to, and maybe even if it's not ministry related, it's still very much ministry oriented, for what you get to do and what you've been able at the age of, really since your mid 40s to now, doing some amazing work. Why don't you share what you've done over the
So
past few years?
I'll just say that if we had hours to spend on this, if you saw the actual progression that God brought me through, from birth to now, it you don't know it at the time, but when you look back, you see the footsteps. You see why you went through certain things to prepare you for certain things, and no one ever can prepare for their kid's death. And that's one of the things that's my ministry now is that I grew up in churches that didn't talk about that kind of stuff. It was all about name it and claim it. Excuse me. And if you ask for it, you're going to get it. Well, I asked for God to heal my kid, and that didn't happen. I knew that. I knew what was coming because God specifically talked to me. However, walking through that prepared me for where I'm at now because um, I did a short stint with the Summit County Prosecutor's Office. And then, but prior to that, I was doing bodyguard work and what we call executive protection, um, you know, getting paid $10 an hour to get shot at and stuff like that. So it's always a fun time. But I mean, I still do that on the side. But after Summit County, I got a job as a probation officer and juvenile probation officer. And I never realized what that job actually was until I started working in it. And even though a lot of these kids are what society would consider throwaway kids, you end up building relationships with them. You end up building trust with them. They trust you more than they trust some of their family members or parents or anything like that. And, you know, I did the job as a juvenile probation officer for 2.5 years and moved into a different part of I got a promotion into what we call the specialized dockets. And I work with the human trafficking docket, the juvenile drug court, the family drug court, which is kids being taken away because they're born as crack babies or cocaine babies or stuff like that. So this job is not for the faint of heart. This job is tough, but I feel like having gone through what I went through with my own kid, that it strengthened me to be able to do this job. Now, like I said, I promised my daughter to get the GED. I never promised all of this, but this is this is what God has placed me in, and it has been God. So when I look at where I'm at, where I've come from, this job has.
But Doug, it's that ambition that He's always given you, and just like He gave you the opportunity to do an interview, and you turned it into creating a music label. To create, you were like, I'm going to take it to this level. I'm going to turn that key, and I'm going to run with it. If you're behind me, and I think that's what you did here. I know it's not easy to always talk about yourself because you do a lot of interviews where you talk about Skylar, you talk about what you've gone through, and to be honest, it's healing for you in a lot of ways to continue to talk about those things. And it's healing for other people to hear it. I know it's not always something you probably always love to do, because you're talking about yourself, right?
Right. I feel like I'm boring.
Right. Yeah.
So,
but I want, what? So, we will end the show.
Yeah.
But before we do that, I say all of that you've been super transparent. And I want you to end on a very transparent note, as much as you want to be transparent now.
Okay.
Because how I started this show was, if you were with us from the beginning, and you're now watching to the end, our dear friend Amber Plaster, the famous singer, how she's known to the world, but to us, she's just Amber, and
Right.
She's our dear friend. She's going through the fight of her life, right? She's dealing with cancer. She's dealing with some issues. She just had lung surgery this evening, so we're praying for recovery. So that's what we're going to ask you guys for tonight. But as I say all these things, what Doug is going through and all the trials that he's going through, in his life from the beginning to now, he may have something else. And so tonight's a call for prayer. And so I don't know, Doug, if you want to be a little transparent, you don't have to be fully transparent. But you have some things that need some prayer for you personally. And so I thought no better opportunity if we couldn't have all four of us together, because Elijah's on a hiatus for a long time. Maybe he won't come back. I don't know. Normally sound off's the four of us, and we didn't want to do this show without the four of us. But I knew right away, hey, this was that opportunity to, because we've never done your full interview. You've done your full interview. We've done the Skylar part, and so and we didn't do that tonight purposely because I want you guys to go back and watch that show. If you guys are dealing with loss, grief, and need comfort, that show is that show. So look for that sound off episode. I'm going to leave it right in the link below.
That was the take on. Wasn't that a take on the world
Conference? Yeah, it was our virtual conference episode. So I want you guys to go back and watch that because that's the full video. That's some really good stuff there. Not always the most pleasant to talk about.
That was one of our heaviest shows.
It was one of our heaviest. So Doug, I'm gonna let you end with a call for prayer for you personally, because we pray to God that you're not going through another trial.
Yeah. So basically, since January, I've been battling what we thought were urinary tract infections, and I've had every test done known to man, and they came back and said you have what we believe is prostatitis, which is just a big word to say that I have an infection in my prostate, and it never goes away. They can treat it with antibiotics, but it'll flare back up. And I had a flare up, and I went. My doctor sent me to the ER. I went to the ER. They did blood work, and my blood work was off the charts for my red and white blood cell counts being high, and which I have an infection, so they can consider that. But then one of the tests that they did with my blood was that they were looking at my bone marrow and how I'm making bone marrow to fight the infections and whatnot. And so they said that I could possibly have leukemia. We don't know. I have to wait until pretty much the end of this month to find out how my blood is since the infection's gone and the antibiotics all out of my system. And so hopefully there's a praise report coming that I don't have leukemia. We've gone through that, with brain cancer with my daughter, but my nephew had leukemia, but it's not something that runs in our family. He's from an adopted sister, and so he's not a blood relation. So it's kind of, it kind of is heavy in our house, because we know what the outcomes are. I had a friend just pass away back in 2015 who was 50, I think 50, 55, of leukemia. And so it's serious. But God's going to have happen whatever's going to have happen. And I have to believe whatever way it goes it's his purpose. And I can honestly tell you that the only way that I can say that is that I know what I went through with my daughter, and I know the darkness that I went through, but I also know the reassurance that God gave me at that time. So I know that whatever may come of it, either way, God's got our back.
Well, Doug, thanks for sharing that. I know that's not easy to share. And so if you're out there, that's what we're asking for is prayer. I'm going to end in a prayer. So we're past the 2-hour mark where sound off typically ends, and Doug needs to get up for work tomorrow. So
6 a.m. comes
really quick. So, hey, you know what? I'm going to say this. We miss you, Robbie. We miss you, Johnny. But tonight, obviously, how we're ending this, it probably wouldn't have ended like this. We would have been super fiery, had a lot of that. So let's just take this to the Lord right now. And dear Lord, we come to you tonight. We bring to you Amber, Lord, right now in her weakest of moment, not only physically, emotionally, spiritually. Lord, we're asking that you show up to her in a mighty way tonight. We ask you for quick recovery, quick return to home, quick return for future surgeries and future treatments that will lead her to complete health. Lord, we thank you for Doug and the story that you've given his whole family, to just reveal yourself to him. We thank you for the life of Skylar, that she was able to reach so many with who she was for you, Lord. And tonight we come to you with a very transparent prayer request for Doug and his health. You know the situation. We pray that those test results come back clear, and that Doug has a renewed ambition to not only serve you but serve others, and that you give him the strength to do that. In your holy, precious name, through the Son, Yeshua, say amen. All right, guys, thank you so much, everybody. We're getting a little sound back on sound off, so we are going to sound off tonight. So catch you guys next time. This has been sound off, and I'm sorry for the reverb here. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
The breath in my lungs just can't hold me. No man. Start a revolution with no man control. I'm gonna sound off. Start a revolution with the breath in my lungs. Sound off.